Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant ringing in the new year with me is the Prudentialist, who writes under the pen name Matthew Williams from a right-wing coded point of view. And in this conversation, we take a look back at 2025 and a look forward to 2026 and review reflexively our work up to this point as micro-influencers. I'm microdosing celebrity all these 8 years running this show, and it's great. So high, mighty. No, I'm kidding. I'm not all that high or mighty for that matter. But in this conversation, we do dive deep and get really honest about our work and people's perceptions of our work and how fraught it is to tread into certain domains of discourse and not fumble the ball, as we all do. You can find links to the Prudentialist's work down there in the description, as well as links to support this channel. I hope you have a fantastic 2026. Without further ado, here is the Prudentialist.
Happy New Year, Benjamin. How are you?
Happy New Year, sir. I'm good.
Good.
Ready to get my shit together. Pardon the French.
Aren't we all? I feel like that's the struggle every New Year's is like, well, I should really get my act together, and then the year passes, and you're like, wow, I should really get my act together, and I think you just do that every year until you die.
Yeah. All those acts come together right now.
The world is indeed a stage.
Yeah. Well, yeah, especially nowadays.
Yeah.
What's your take on yourself as an internet sensation?
It's really funny. I there's the off-going joke where I think someone takes the clip from the Matrix and Keanu Reeves is just escaping the little battery pod, and he's like, "No, put me back in. I was a niche internet micro e-celebrity." And I don't think like that at all, but I think that title is quite applicable, I suppose. I mean, niche is the appropriate term. I heard someone say, "Oh, it's my niche favorite so and so" one time, I think, when I was going live, and I was like, "That works for me. I'll take niche." I don't see myself doing, if I do this for more than, I don't know, I don't mean this to be rude or offensive or anything, but I'm thinking to myself, if I'm still doing this by the time, like a decade from now, like when I'm 40, I hope that I'm doing quite well financially to keep doing this, or something has gone terribly wrong. So I don't know. It's been a good year, I think, for me at least. It's been an interesting year to be online, especially because I think this administration's first year has been radically different than, say, the first year of the Trump administration. But there's a lot of, as George Lucas said, it's like poetry, it rhymes. So, I mean, there's a lot to sort of look back on and dig into.
Yeah.
What about you? How was your year? You've had an interesting trajectory over the last year.
Oh, you think?
I don't know, because like I've been vaguely aware of who you are for the last couple of years, even before I was doing this sort of regularly. I was in a lot of mainstream. Well, I guess you'd say mainstream, but I was very politically active without being on the internet when I was younger. I was kind of aware of the evergreen stuff going on. And then I think, like a lot of people, I just decided to get on the internet around 2020, but I was already very kind of familiar with a lot of what had been going on nationally with the culture war. I had phone banked with certain presidential campaigns in 2016. I did some volunteer work. No, I was a Rand Paul supporter in 2016, cool. And then he dropped out, and then I just said, well, I don't really have any other choice but to support Donald Trump, so... I thought it was funny looking back. I was like, that was my first presidential election to vote in. And I was like, wow, I can't believe this. And for me, it was growing up as an Army brat. It was always really interesting because it was like, this is something that is somewhat sacred. There was that sort of national sort of
civic duty.
Yeah, that civic sacramentality that comes with participating in the system. Like the day I turned 18, I got to vote in the 2014 primaries shortly thereafter. And I was like super excited to like participate in the system. And I had this like really big idealism about what it is. And I think that sort of, it's very American, I think, still to hold on to this Mr. Smith goes to Washington idealism. And then I think you get a lot of buckets of ice cold water, and there is no ALS challenge. It's just here to rain on your parade. And so, I've been participating politically for quite some time. I'm still active where I'm at locally, but it is, it's fun to watch the trajectory where I think that's a phrase I've used a lot in 2025, is that things are very nakedly obvious. I think a lot of people have put away any sort of nicety, and they're just kind of very straightforward about what they want, left or right.
Jeez. Yeah. My trajectory, well, bought my first house, bought.
Yeah.
One doesn't buy a house. But,
Congratulations, though.
well, thank you. It's pretty awesome. I mean, once I became a landowner, something kind of changed in me, but then I kind of reverted back to kind of just moping about the property. I'm really a home dweller. But that was a big switch. And, but in my content, I just feel like I'm kind of floundering. I posted a Happy New Year's picture on my, on YouTube, you can do
Yeah,
little
the little
posts.
community posts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
community posts. And somebody said as a grumpy Gen Xer, this might just be me, but I think it's impossible to have a good life and also create good content. And I'm like, are you saying my content sucks or my life sucks? But I get what he's saying. It's hard to have a life and be as intensely committed to the online world. And I think that my work is not necessarily suffering, but I'm kind of in a fallow period. I really sense like, what are the questions? What am I curious about? What am I exploring? And there's a couple of questions that are electrifying because they get such a strong reaction, but then they have real world consequences because people assume that if you're asking certain questions, you have certain opinions on certain groups of people that have very intense desire to maintain their narrative about identity and which identities are identity politics and which identities are not identity politics. They just are politics. I'm kind of going a roundabout way of saying I keep on getting in trouble with the Jews, but not because of anything I've said, but because I talk to people who have varying opinions on that.
Yeah,
group.
yeah, the guilt by association I feel like is the number one way in which you can land yourself in hot water. I mean, that's really sort of the basis of all internet politics, I think, in this day and age, is that you really just get you can be an absolute Boy Scout, but if you talk to someone who is controversial or has had associations with other people, it's a surefire way to get in trouble, and it
Yeah.
tends to be a black spot on your permanent record, so to
Yeah.
speak.
But the interesting thing is that I'm always interested in what's at the edge of the Overton window, what's at the fringe of discourse, especially on the right wing, because the left wing's rather obvious what the fringe are. But exploring the ideas on the right, there are tripwires and landmines there. And I realized very early when I started looking into what is the not left beyond the IDW liberal plantation, where if we just go back to free speech, marketplace of ideas, then everything's going to be hunky dory, and we'll resurrect our institutions, get the right people back in power, meritocracy, da 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 da. And then you start reading Yarvin. You're like, wait, hold on. This whole system goes back way further and is much more entrenched in these incentive structures that are not going to be solved by marketplace of ideas, rationality. Actually, they're fomented by marketplace of ideas and rationality. But if once you start heading in that direction, you see this thing called racism, like naked, bald, open, full-throated, deep belly laughing racism. And you have to be not allergic to it in order to interact with the ideas. But as soon as you start associating yourself with that, you are cast out of polite society, because polite society is ruled by a couple of different precepts, and one of them is to not be a bigot. Even in the IDW post woke world where bigotry was weaponized, there's still tripwires around this thing called bigotry, and so it's really difficult to navigate that.
Yeah, and I think that that's been the biggest consequence of maybe the last several, well, maybe the last decade. I mean, I think that, as I mentioned, I think a lot of things have sort of become nakedly obvious, where it's like, yeah, bigotry and the claim of racism is often used as a rhetorical and political cudgel, either to cancel people or to prevent further discussion in other places. I mentioned this, I think, on a stream not too long ago. I said, if you, I think it was in the Atlantic, they had hosted a debate years ago. This was when Freakonomics came out, so I think like Stephen Levitt, his other writer, and they were arguing about the claim they made in Freakonomics about widespread access to abortion services reducing crime. and they argued against none other than Steve Saylor to the counterpoint. And if you were to go look up that article right now, I think it's in the Atlantic. Forgive me if I don't remember it off the top of my head. They had removed both of the authors' names. So Saylor's gone. Stephen Levitt is not on there. It's just the debate in its original text, but the names of the people are now it just says authors. It doesn't say who was participatory in there. So, I mean, we still participate in a way of damnatio memoriae. We try to totally erase the records of people that have come before us that have talked about, blasphemous or these insurrectionary ideas. And it is particularly interesting, I think, in the end of to look back on all of 2025, I think it's just been, as with the first Trump administration, I think that the scale of these incentive structures or these rhetorical cudgels and networks of people that facilitate, how do we off ramp this rage or this direction of online politics, very similar to what we saw in, say, 2012 and as well as with the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street years, is how do we off ramp this rage into being a potential issue for, say, the regime, the cathedral, whatever, the powers that be. And how do we change that elsewhere? And I think that's when you've seen a widespread degree of permission pieces, or just there's this old meme where it's just like the U.S. government will say like, oh yeah, we did this terrible thing 50 years ago. What are you going to do about it? And it's sort of the same thing now where it's like, oh yeah, there's, billions of dollars from the American taxpayer goes to like Al-Shabaab, but like, what are you going to do about it? And it's, that seems to be where we're at. And unfortunately, when you interrogate these ideas on the right, there is, like you said, always the consequence of association, because I can go read some really weird, I don't even know if I could call it left-wing literature, but it seems like this very kind of borderline progressive nihilist sort of stuff. Like, I've been really interested lately in Thomas Moynihan or Nick Bostrom. And like, Nick Bostrom is like a very well-known scientist. I guess you could call him a technocrat, but he's like super concerned about like, well, there's certain information that gets out there and this can lead to the end of the world. And it's this whole vulnerable world hypotheses. And it's like, well, the way that
world.
I would...
That sounds related to the what Popper's idea about intolerant tolerance or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
to some degree. But for Bostrom, it's more like, say scientists discovered a way, or technology advances in a way that the average person could create a weapon of mass destruction or a piece of information that could hurt people. He's like, that needs to be controlled. And his solutions are more, more technocratic world governments, very similar to like Eliezer Yudikowsky when it comes to AI. Whereas like more radical thinkers like Thomas Moynihan, who's written Spinal Catastrophism. He's written a book also on the conceptualization of human extinction, which are really interesting texts. But it's like, I'm never going to get in trouble for interrogating these ideas. If anything, I'm going to get the publisher of these books to be like, hey, this weirdo on the internet like really liked our book. You should go check it out. But if you interrogate, say, for instance, I find it interesting that Tucker Carlson says, I'm against identity politics, but when he interviews someone like Orrin McIntyre, he makes this very subtle reference to Lothrop Stoddard, who wrote a very, at the time you could call it a progressive book. Today it would probably be called a white nationalist screed, like The Rising Tide of Color. And it's just like, you can't interrogate that guy and then say, well, I'm against identity politics. Like, there's clearly some dog whistle, frequencies here that are being missed. Yeah. But if you interrogate those ideas, obviously you're going to get in trouble, despite the fact that those ideas probably are worth interrogating, because when you look at the world around us, especially in this sort of claim of multiculturalism or trying to get along with everybody, there is very open, nakedly obvious claims of revenge or screwing other people over for the advancement of my particular group or ethnicity. And it's like, well, you can't have Karl Popper's polite civil society when it is predicated on, well, I've got mine for me and my people, and it will come at the cost of you. And I think that that's been the dangerous, Pandora's box that I don't think that a lot of maybe IDW or people who claim that you're woke right or whatever can put that. You can't put the cat back in the bag. Like, that's... If there is one universal truth, it is that everyone, to some large degree, with the exception of white liberals, looks out for themselves. And I think that you can't really put that info hazard out of the back into the bag.
Yeah. Well, even the word anti-Semitism I have a problem with, because I think it's just a particular branding for hyper racism. You know, it's like BIPOC. You know, it's
Hmm.
like black and indigenous people of color. Like, why is black first? And when people talk about racism and anti-Semitism, it's like there already is a separatism within that. But anyways, the topic of anti-Semitism, you and I were just on a stream with Millennial Woes, who is completely banned from YouTube. I don't
Oh
even know if you
yeah,
can say his
I remember
names.
when he was banned from YouTube. So it's been
Yeah.
a hot. It's been like 10 years at this point
Well, he's
almost.
he's one of the people who got banned early and got banned really harshly, you know,
Yeah.
and there's no coming back. Like Fuentes, I'm sure is he can go out, and that's a whole other topic. The Fuentes thing, like to what degree is that a psyop? So and what you're talking about, if they push these ideas that will destroy or erode coalition building on the not left, then why wouldn't they facilitate that? Why wouldn't they push those ideas further? Why wouldn't they make anti-Semitism more and more attractive as an idea that you're not supposed to talk about? Because there's certain people, me included, or me primarily, are attracted to the ideas that you're not supposed to talk about. But we were on the stream, and there's very strong opinions against the Jewish people, Israel people, and I was out of my depth understanding what they were talking about. But you being familiar with those ideas in a private chat, I won't say exactly what you said, but you said, no, these guys are already, they're not understanding where the playing field is coming from. So they have these ideas that were cast out of polite society, but the ideas themselves and the way to treat those ideas have already developed past where they got stuck when they got cast out. White nationalism, white supremacy, that is a false term too. But this really strong loathing, particular loathing against the Jews, it is real. It is real. It is real. Because there's a pun right there. I can't not say it. But at the same time, like once you actually engage with it honestly, it'll evaporate and turn into something else. Like the deeper critique of why white European people nowadays are trying to grapple with ethnic identity, and they are so attracted to the Jewish question and the black African American phenomena. Like they can't get towards a positive identity that doesn't, formulate some sort of resentment against those two groups.
Well, I think in a large part, maybe to take a step back, is that when we look at a lot of these ecosystems, there is Twitter is a really good example. I'll start from Twitter and then I'll sort of break out into maybe the more alt tech spaces. Because, for instance, if you look at what the administration has done, right? There's a lot of good that the admin has done, but we also have to work at the speed of the federal government, which is incredibly slow.
Mm-hmm.
And you can only do so many things by executive order, and then you have to wait for the courts or the Supreme Court to give you the go ahead or the victory. I mean, for a lot of people, there's frustration that the administration's playing by the rules. I can express some similar sentiment to that because, it's very disheartening, I think, when you see Stephen Miller or JD Vance tweet about like judicial tyranny, and it's just like, well, we have historical precedent to get around that, or it just feels very impotent when you're telling the base that we're being screwed by the courts, and it's just like, well, there have been precedents to have the courts go screw themselves, so to speak. But at the same time, we live in a hyper gamified, monetized environment that really wants you to stick to your perspective cult of personality, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I think that when we look at even on the left, or even for if you want to say the word normie or whatever, most people have go-to individuals they like to listen to that either tells them the news, offers analysis, or looks into deep dives based on the community. My co-host and I, Gio, had discussed about a year ago at this point an article, I think it came from Slate or an advertising journal, that was discussing how most people get their news from someone they already like. It's the fandomification of the information market. And by that just means all things media, all things news, and things like that. And that allows you to investigate everything from wild claims about, did this celebrity murder somebody, all the way to certain restaurants I can't name, or this video gets banned off YouTube. And so All that being said, when we look at when people get banned, for instance, or when people decide not to engage in the mainstream because they've been canceled or they've been deplatformed or etc., you do tend to formulate your coalition of the people who are more likely to follow you. And that usually means the diehard true believers, and that means that there's going to be a lot of um, sort of a feedback loop, I think, of people who are more radicalized on certain issues. They want to stick to
Hmm.
the fringes because, well, if you've been banned, I've been banned. We're
Yeah.
probably saying the right things. Ergo, we need to
Yeah.
stick together and tribe up, so to speak. And I mean, that's sort of how it always has been online, more so on the right than anywhere else because the left doesn't suffer the same consequences, obviously. And so, for instance, if you're not on certain platforms or discursive spaces, or you choose not to engage with certain communities because you've deemed them to be an enemy or a fed or psyop or whatever term that you want to use, whatever justification you can say that I'm not going to engage with this particular person or information, then all of a sudden you kind of are cut off from other developments in discourse or ideas and
Yeah.
spaces that maybe
Refinements
your
specifically.
yeah, like your ideas may not be as fully formed as the others, and also it has to come to age differences and so on. So
Yeah.
like I'm like I'm 30, like my perspective on the world is going to be vastly different than someone who is much older than me or someone who has been in these spaces a lot longer than I have, or they might be more cynical and burnt out, or they're already sort of dug in and entrenched in their positions, and I may or may not have some neuroplasticity left, God only knows, to maybe change my opinions on things.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I think that a lot of people get dug into what they deem to be true, but also that they maybe don't want to entertain something new, or they don't want to entertain something different because it might affect your model, or more likely, it may affect your business slash community
Yeah.
model. And
Yeah.
I think that that is something that always gets thrown around a lot is that for instance, I mean on Twitter we see this all the time, that someone's getting allegedly a $7,000 check from the Israelis, someone's getting like a grant from like Peter Thiel, someone's associated with so and so foundation, like I remember someone like the guy who I'm not going to name him, but like he has a little nest egg in crypto. He works with his wife, and he has a business doing security consulting. And he works with some guys that he met with online. And they now have a business based in like Texas and I think like Colorado. And it's like good for you, but like because you got to write an article in the American Mind one time, you have now a whole army of haters that assume you're some shadow op from the Claremont Institute. And it's just like the Claremont Institute doesn't have that kind of money to pay for influencers, and most people haven't read Leo Strauss enough to be particularly good Straussian influencers. So it just sort of boils down to this information ecosystem where it's become very difficult, I think, for people to maybe grasp, well, I know my ways, I know my community, I'm going to stick to my guns. But at the same time, when we, cross streams or cross paths, we are oftentimes like, whoa, like this feels very 2017, or this feels very,
Yeah.
just like, oh, like we're still talking about things that I thought were sort of discursively settled in my own network. And I think that that's what becomes very interesting is just that the left is kind of basically united, and it doesn't matter if you're like really big on factory farming. And I've used that example a lot of times. That you can be a nice like a nice white woman from Colorado living outside of Denver in the suburbs, and you really care about factory farming, and you give PETA like $25 a month because you really care. That's your moral impetus. I'm not even going to judge you because I think that it's important for us to address factory farming. I think it's a very bipartisan issue. But because that's been deemed left wing by the powers that be, she could easily get canceled if she were to disagree on, say, like the trans question or any other major left wing bugaboo that is fundamentally anti civilizational and in a large degree anti white. And so that puts her in a really precarious position. Whereas on the right, the nodes are not, the right doesn't really have an intersectionality in the way that the left does, in the sense that there's no overarching theory because
Yeah.
the some of us might be techno optimists, and we might want to be like the new yuppies of the 1980s, and we want to make a lot of money, and we want to make America great again that way.
Yeah.
Others, like you interviewed with Nick Land, like some are like very fundamentalist Christians that want to make and retain that WASP Anglo-Saxon Protestant identity and that should survive. Others are like, well, screw all of this. I'm sort of this Nietzschean, neo-pagan vitalist, and I want to destroy everything that exists. And all of them don't like each other a lot very much.
No, they don't.
But that coalition has to kind of basically maintain itself because at the end of the day, regardless if you work in Silicon Valley or you go to like an Astaru folk community, I know that at the end of the day, the left wants you and me up against the wall, and that's a
Yeah.
problem. So we
Yeah.
should find a way to work together. But then, of course, because we're so disjointed, there's various nodes and networks, and so many people on this side of politics, myself included, we're all kind of trying to maintain crumbs of a pie that has largely been eaten because we're all the same kind of demographics of people trying to who would give us money. They're all we're all fighting for scraps, and I think
Hmm.
that that's why it gets so territorial or it gets so entrenched because not just money or community or organizing, but also just because, like, hey, I've been doing this for forever, and I think to some degree there's sunk cost and all sorts of other things. But there is just a great degree of being fractured and disjointed in comparison to, say, the not right.
Hmm. I don't know if it's ever going to be solved because of the like there's something deep down in the psychology of the people who end up on the not left that makes them prone to conflict, disagreeableness. Whereas the left can aim its disagreeableness against the oppressor, and for whatever reason, the oppressor is white, cis, heteronormative culture on the masculine side of things. Like that, they have the target, and it's a persistent target, and it goes through all their vectors of identity, and it allows them to justify their fetishes, whether the fetish being like a munchy mom, like wanting to project this idea of the trans child onto the world and then protect these kids by destroying their functional livelihood, or the fetishist who is a trans-identified man who will be run out of town and bashed in one way or another, or at least not allowed into the women's restroom if the other party gets his way. They're intruding, like the right or the not left is always intruding as a boogeyman on these people's will. And the right feels the same way, but we don't have a singular target. Like there's no one target that unites us other than this hazy idea called the cathedral, which some people take further, call it the synagogue, right? So then once there is this idea, then everybody kind of reduces it down into their own version of that idea, and it separates the political will from each other. I'm trying to describe something that's very complex, but there's no outgroup.
Everyone, a lot of people are looking for a theory of everything.
Yeah, and the left
Yeah,
has that. The left can offer that, and it
yeah.
runs on the software of resentment and selfishness and chaos, entropy. It excuses you for all of your weaknesses. This is the bio-Leninism concept that Spandrel came up with. I have an interview in the wings, and again, he's just going to get me in trouble because he's got certain opinions about certain people, and it's just like really not not acceptable. But the right doesn't have that, and that's what makes it cool to walk around and talk to these people, because they all have their own unique identities and stuff. But when the left is willing to shoot you in the middle of a college campus and you're more concerned about some intern posting something about Hitler, obviously jokingly, than stripping those people of the power of of the institutions and of killing you and then laughing about it. Like what is even the point?
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, I think 2025 was maybe everyone looks for a
Hmm.
nice punchy title or catchphrase. I
You
remember,
got one?
I wish I was thinking about it because I've been writing an essay about 2025, and I'm like, man, how do I top? Because, for instance, like Morgoth's Review wrote an essay a couple of years ago when Jim Medicare announced that he was kind of like stepping away from the internet because his health was getting even worse. I know
Yeah.
he's not dead yet. He pops up every now and then for a stream, but even then, it's more like he's dying and he just doesn't know when. And he had said that that was the year the internet stopped laughing. And it's just like, well, that's a really that was very punchy. It was very
Hmm.
good. And then it's just like, well, I don't know how you can top there is no phrase to say like, this is when like the memes stop being memes, because even then, like, you could argue that memes helped get Trump elected. But I mean, Charlie Kirk got shot in the face or in the neck in broad daylight in front of his daughters and his wife, and a good portion of the country agreed with it and enjoyed it and mocked the death of an honest, hardworking man who'd started TPUSA when he was 17 years old. Like, if there was ever the embodiment of the American dream, it was the high school quarterback guy who starts a business and doesn't go to college to start this business and make it successful and is killed, and he's just a couple years older than me. And I don't know what else you're supposed to say other than like these are the stakes. Like that's the gauntlet's been thrown before you. And I think that it's very hard for a lot of conservatives or a lot of people in general to maybe conceptualize that, that you can say polling is fake or whatever and come up with an excuse or cope about it. But when that many people in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, are supportive of that kind of political action, and the left offers no, slap on the wrist or anything like that to those that support those things, you're left in a really weird place, because Charlie Kirk was very public and very open, and his ideas on a lot of issues had changed from when maybe, Patrick Casey and Nick Fuentes would send people to go gripe and ask questions uncomfortably about like Israel or whatever in 2017. A lot had changed in the nearly 10 years since that had taken place. And I think for a lot of world events over the years, whether it was COVID or the war in Ukraine or October 7th, 2 years ago now, there are these events that I think really break people's mental models for how the world works.
Yeah.
And I think, and to some degree, the whole meme about nothing ever happens becomes an avenue of psychosecurity, but also like the Marshall McLuhan concept of auto amputation. There's so much stimuli coming in, I have to cut it off and defend myself mentally and my senses. And so I think for October 7th, we watched that fundamentally break apart the Democratic coalition. We saw this in Michigan quite plainly with Kamala Harris and a lot of people voting for either Trump or Jill Stein on the issue of Palestine. And then also I think that it put a lot of people like Bill Ackman and other prominent, wealthy and politically active Jews in America in a weird spot, because I don't think they particularly like a lot of like white Christian evangelicals that vote Republican. I don't think that, and I mean, there's polling data to back that up. I'm not saying that as a general statement without warrant, but also at the same time, I think the left has made it very clear in their model of anti-racism that they don't really see a difference between Jews and white Europeans. And so I think that's put them in a very awkward spot, and I can't relate to it because I'm not Jewish. But I do think that, it's like, like some of these things have now come to bite you in the ass. And that is unfortunate. But are you willing to maybe come on board and say, well, whatever is bad for you is also bad for me? And I think you've seen some of that happen. And I think that there's been some attempts to answer these questions rhetorically. I know on the wake of the Jacob Savage piece, I know
Which one was that?
That's the one from Compact Magazine about anti-white discrimination.
Specifically males and millennials.
Specifically males and millennials in like the entertainment
institutional
industry.
Discrimination.
Yeah, and institutional anti-white discrimination. It's a good article. But at the same time, like Jacob, like, and a lot of people on the right and some even on the left had pointed out, like, well, Jacob Savage had also pointed out like a year or two ago that he was concerned about Jewish erasure in media and in television and in acting and so on. And a lot of that has to do with DEI and other things. And at the same time, right afterwards, David Azarad, who is by no means like a raging progressive, he spoke at NatCon. A lot of people have called him like a Nazi sympathizer and other things, which I think is laughable. But David Azarad is then trying to offer sort of this rhetorical or a polemical response to, as you had mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, sort of this right wing or this online right, and mainly I think more has to do with Twitter. I know apparently it's very prominent on Instagram Reels and TikTok and stuff like that. So I mean, again, I'm not on those platforms, so I have no idea how pervasive it is or how algorithmically boosted it is. I think it has a lot to do with your own engagement with the product. But he's trying to answer the criticisms that are levied by what gets called like the Jewish question, or gets levied by Kevin McDonald in his book The Culture of Critique. And he offers an answer saying like, well, you can't don't look at yourself as a victim, even though there's a lot of things that get claimed by JQ advocates that are true. And there's a lot of literature and a lot of claims that'll back it up. Uh, Often by progressive Jewish individuals themselves, but at the same time, is like you shouldn't deprive yourself and look at yourself as a victim. You should try and retain some sense of agency. And so I think at the present moment, on those very third rail, don't go piss over the side of the subway station kind of questions, you're left trying to, everyone's kind of reeling to make answers and responses, because Pandora's box has been opened. Like, the left wing looks at Israel, and has been for a long time, as this American imperialist project of white supremacy and colonialism, and it's bad, and there's a lot of issues there. And then at the same time, the right looks at these things, and especially on the far right, you have like, well, clearly there's numerous individuals, and that's where you do the whole the early life check meme comes into place. There's like, well, there's a lot of individuals of a certain descent that are the spearheads of progressive movements and institutions, but at the same time, like, you're and they're kind of left in the middle here, getting screwed over on both sides. A lot of prominent Jews and a lot of Jewish individuals at the same time, and they're like, well, what do we do about it? And I'm like, well, that's a very good question that I hope you guys can figure out, because I think when you look online, there's a lot of people that are either A, fed up, or B, kind of see past maybe some of the rhetorical lines of defense or arguments that may have been used before. And then it doesn't help that individuals, for instance, like Mark Levin, have called everyone from Jack Posobiec to Richard Barris as just like these virulent, anti-Semites that have it in their genes, which I don't know.
In your DNA, yeah.
In your DNA. I'm like, well, that sounds very blood libelous, Mr. Levin. But I mean, it's just it's a weird place. And I think that you have to walk very trepidatiously, because and it's the same thing with like Azarad's arguments. He was like, well, a lot of these JQ guys don't mention a lot of right-wing Jews, and it's just like, I know who Paul Gottfried is. Like, I know who Murray Rothbard is. Like, I knew those people. I didn't know them personally, but like, I'm familiar with their work. I'm familiar with like the Ludwig von Mises Institute. I'm familiar with Stephen Miller, who is probably the most popular Jew in America on the right now. So it's it's kind of a weird spot to make that claim. But I think that everyone's trying to navigate this information space, because at the same time, there is established. And again, this sounds so controversial to say, but it's just kind of true. Like, there is a lot of Jewish power in America, and especially in the right wing and left wing politics. And it's just like they're in a weird spot to navigate this post information space, where, because of demographic change, the propaganda and the information that's come out of the war in Gaza, and on top of the fact that it's very easy to meme out you'd say like a Hitler edit or the translated versions of his speeches, that all of a sudden you now have to play a different game of the information network and media. Like, to wrap all this up, I thought it was really interesting to have Nick Fuentes and Piers Morgan interview each other, because it was two different generations of media personality that were just shooting past each other. Like, they were just taking pot shots, and they were both missing, because Nick does not give a shit that someone's going to call him a racist or a bigot or an anti-Semite. Nick lives off of that, and it's made him a very effective cult personality and media personality that has made him I don't think he'll ever have to worry about money, ever. I don't know his finances or his financial background or whatever, but like, I think he's good for life. Whereas like, and Nick is like responding and not caring and laughing at some of the things that he's claimed, because Nick doesn't have to worry about what TV boomers have to say about him, because he's already used to it. And Piers Morgan used to have a much higher degree of prominence, and now he's turned into like Maury Popovich for like daytime television, and it's so gaudy and trashy, and it's just like, dude, you've fallen for grace, and then you kind of look like a loser after all of this, because
he's a multimillionaire, so
but I mean, like, he's like no shirt off his back that he has to worry about either. So I mean, it's a weird information space where I think everyone's trying to come up with new answers and new political formulas or strategies to answer these issues.
Yeah. You brought up a lot. You
let me rant, so I'm sorry.
No, I love it. I wanted to pick up the right thread, but all I can think about is Tucker Carlson now, because Tucker he's poking the right bears. Like, I don't like saying I don't agree with everything this person says because it's not about agreement to me, but he pisses off the right people, and I really enjoy that. He's really good at pissing off the right people, and so that makes me aligned. You can tell my politics by that statement. If you can see who gets mad at Tucker, you don't have to think that I believe any given thing, but you can tell like who and what ideas I want to be put back in their place, right? I see the ideological landscape as always in flux. I don't believe in belief as some sort of set thing. I believe in belief as these egregores, these living, breathing communities of faith that are always vying for power, and that there is kind of a teeter-totter, or what do they say, that a pendulum, but the pendulum's going in more than one way. So I intuitively say we got to push against this set of ideas to give the other ideas more space. And so on an intuitive level, why the Israel question is so attractive to me is because it dominates too much of the discourse. It makes too many, it takes up too much of the spotlight. And if we had a fraction, as Americans, a fraction of a desire to secure Ireland for the Irish people as we do to secure Israel for the Israeli people, I would have a different attractiveness to questioning those ideas, or to platforming people who openly question those ideas. Like, Ireland is much more important to me than Israel ever will be, but Ireland's being completely taken over by the progressive swamp. They're being genocided by that slow eke of Fabian demographic replacement, and they're being shamed and as a people into non-existence. But nobody cares about Ireland. Everybody cares about Israel. So it's not even, I believe in Israel self-determination. I mean, it's a nasty business being a conqueror, but that's how all things work. And that's how America, I don't know, you could probably get into the weeds beyond my understanding of how America how the West was won. But there is a constant teeter-tottering of demographic replacement. And unless a people has the will to say we are a people and we reject the other, or we articulate the other as a lesser, have lesser access to the direction of our people, right? So America can work. America's just this another teeter-totter. It's just all these different demographics going back and forth. But if you see like this massive wave of immigrants coming in by one set of the powerful elites, like that's just not balanced. It's not balanced. So remigration, the interesting question, I said this to Peter Kionis. I always want to Kionis.
Yeah.
I said that the political landscape for 2026 is going to be defined by Israel and by the UK. Those are the two central questions. Does Israel have a right to exist? And does Englishness have a right to exist? And how do those two things operate? And that's why you'll see the Andrew Gold conversations, the Carl Benjamin conversations, the guy who Andrew Gold, Steve Laws, he's very strong on this really far right. No, everybody goes away.
Yeah.
Unless you're British. That's never going to work, but that idea needs to be spoken about, because if this thing's going to be fixed, we have to see all the degrees of the conversation about it. And being open to the degrees of the conversation is the most essential thing for me. And being hobbled or being faced with real life consequences for talking to people about things, especially by people who are nominally about free discourse, it's just like, well, how do I navigate that situation? I went too far in too many different directions.
No, I think that everything that you asked or brought up is an entirely valid point, because at the end of the day, I mean, you should be able to, in any nominal liberal society, you should be able to interview someone like Steve Laws just as much as you should be able to interview Ibrahim X. Kendi. And like, who knows? Maybe that's your business strategy. Is like for
Yeah.
every Steve Laws you interview an Ibrahim X Kendi, and you
Yeah.
just become the like one safe space on the internet where everyone gets to have their soapbox. I don't know. I'm not your SEO business analytics guy, but in a normal liberal society where we do value discourse, that potentially should be realistically attainable. Where for
Yeah.
you should be able to interview Laws, but you should also be able to interview Robin DiAngelo or whoever that you want to pick
Yeah.
for your choosing. There's a lot more interesting left wingers than Robin DiAngelo. But at the end of the day,
You
I
can't
think
find
that,
a hotter woman though on the left.
yeah,
Man,
well, that's the
she's a snack.
well, as the saying goes, just remember the hottest woman in your life is your wife, and that's how it's always going to be. But
That's true.
at the
I
end
was
of the
joking,
day,
Leslie,
right? Like
if you're
the question of self-determination or whatnot. I mean, like Marshall McLuhan had said it best that like violence is a quest for identity. And when, for most people, you don't get to riot in the streets without severe legal consequences, like we saw with the Rotterdam protests in England, as well as some of the stuff that's been going on in Ireland, where the security state really clamps down on actual Englishmen or actual Irishmen defending their right to self-determination, then all of a sudden people will retreat to the spaces that still feel safe to be transgressive, which is the online.
Yeah.
And of course, in America, we have the greatest degree of freedom of speech and freedom of reach without as much algorithmic clampdown than, I mean, you and I have no age verification system unless, I don't know about your state, but like for where I live, like if you wanted to go see porn, like you're gonna have to use a VPN because of age verification laws. But like my Substack's not gonna be age verified, unlike in the UK where like the JAQ Substack ran by some prominent like right wing Twitter anons of the UK, Britpol sphere. Fundamentally have to have age verification if you as an English reader wants to go read their critique of Keir Starmer. Like that's ridiculous. But at the same time, the questions about self-determination, like I would love it if America was the prominent proponent in the world for international self-determination. Like if America said Ireland is for the Irish,
Yeah.
Israel is for the Israelis, and like
Yeah.
Egypt is for the Egyptians, that would be a much better American foreign policy than a lot of the things that we've done in the past historically. And the question always has to be about, well, what is the national story that relates to identity? This is why history is so important.
Yeah.
Jeremy Carl spent a great deal of time talking about this in his book, The Unprotected Class, about the erasure of American and by extension just white history towards the United States when it comes to the statues, when it's come to the Smithsonian during the Biden administration, talking about what are the characteristics of whiteness, and
Yeah.
so.
But
Which
they adopt
Yeah.
that leftist trick of, well, you can never tell the difference between one race and another. They always focus on that margins when it suits them, and then they back away into ambiguity when it doesn't. I'm sorry, I'm not formulating the thought.
Yeah, no,
correctly, but-
that is true. Like, there's a lot of times where relativism is the ultimate sort of rhetorical trick to get out of hard conversations. This is why the tweet of 2025, I really do think goes to
Shout it out.
to Millennial Woes, and he had said, "It is amazing how much leftist discourse is just them pretending not to understand things, thus making discourse impossible." That is the tweet of the year for 2025. I think it's really good, and everyone has been screenshotting it. Everyone from David Sachs to even people in just anonymous Twitter people. It's just true. It is true in a lot of ways. Because
We should do a campaign based on the power of that tweet to get him reinstituted on YouTube.
Yeah, we should. We really should. I think that he deserves. And I've said this before, kind of jokingly. Like, if I were to be a rich billionaire and I was a shitposter on the internet, I would be like setting aside these like little retirement accounts for when they do want to stop doing it. Just because, like, okay, man, you got banned.
Yeah.
You did some interesting discourse.
Yeah.
Here is your cancellation pension, and you can live comfortably now. Like that you've fought the good. But I know that's like my own imaginary win condition. But who knows? Maybe it's possible. But the question of, say, I think the 2026 will be the question of identity, and it will be. It's very interesting to go back 10 years ago and say, well, we should avoid identity politics, and this is bad. And
That's what
that
Tucker
kind of
still says, but Tucker's a smooth operator. He says one thing and he does another.
And but I mean, I'm also not Tucker's audience. I don't care that you're interviewing John Rich from the Good and Rich country duo. Like, it's not my cup of tea. I'm not interested that you're interviewing some guy that claims that he had sex with Barack Obama. Like, I already have my own theories about Barack Obama. Like, I don't need this. I'm more interested when you interview Orrin McIntyre or Andrew Isker or the people that I know, because I'm like, that's good for me because my friends are on Tucker Carlson's show. And that means millions of people get to find out who my friends are. And hopefully Orrin got some book sales out of that. But like, it is, I also recognize that like, I'm not his audience. And if people, and maybe Tucker is acting like a new pipeline or whatever, potentially. That is a very likely case. But at the end of the day, for me at least, it seems that you can't go back to the claims of, oh, we should avoid identity politics, because in so many ways, politics, identity or otherwise, has surpassed all other forms of what we would do with our lives. Robert Putnam really kind of concludes this in Bowling Alone, 25 plus years ago, where he describes that, because of the disappearance of the third space and because we feel alone and dispossessed, that really the only avenue in which we can put our lives into that everyone can still talk about is politics.
Yeah.
And boy, was he right, because everything is political. Everything has become politicized.
Yes.
And the basis of your opinion on something will determine, or at least give me a heuristic of what I think your politics are. And I mean, like, you see this most, in media, criticism is the best example of this. Like, let's go back, I don't know, like 8 years ago, let's say, like, oh, what's your opinion on The Last Jedi by Rian Johnson? Like, depending on how you answer that question, right? Like, I have a pretty good idea of where you might lean politically. And it's the same thing with, like, the Avatar movies or everything else that gets put out these days, or Stranger Things. And so it's like, okay, everything now becomes a platform or a springboard for political discussion based on representation, themes, identity, motifs, etc. And the whole movie TV industry on YouTube has become that way, where
Yes.
and I think it's very deliberate on Hollywood as well, because they know that nothing gets eyes and ears on my shitty project like I'm going to say that there's a gay kiss scene, da 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 da, and it's like, yes, but Disney's going to cut that out for Saudi Arabian markets. That doesn't matter. And the point is to drive Western Anglophone discourse on YouTube, Twitter, etc. about your product, and that's how it generates more ideas and conversations. And it's like, oh, well, if I keep stirring this, like, shitty pot, then all of a sudden the fumes will attract the flies, and then everyone wants to come in and have a snack. And it's a part of, again, that super monetized, gamified network that we live in, where we're all being a part of a system that we may or may not even know that we're participating in. And this is why I think people like Wilfred Bion, Marshall McLuhan, and countless other media and sociology thinkers are really some of the most important people we should be reading or reflecting on, because as much as the questions of identity do matter, the questions of identity are also being played in the largest, psychological operation center known to man, which I think is just like right wing, or not even right wing, but just like the Western internet, because everyone and their mother can play that game. And some people are obviously bigger players than I am, or you, because they might be working for the State Department. They might be working with a think tank, and we may not even know it. And I think that this also generates an ecosystem of schizophrenia, because then all of a sudden you can accuse anyone of being fed or a plant or whatever. And, even if, like, it's been the return of like this really like trigger finger parapolitics. And I think parapolitics meaning the claim that certain events or people or movements that happen are fronts, or they are operations by various groups or individuals or people. And, this can be everything from questioning certain events that happened in, say, Oklahoma City 30 years ago to questioning what's been happening. Everything.
The moon landing.
And what used to, and I mean, it's really funny. I was saying this last night to a friend. I said, I've been rewatching the X-Files with my fiance lately. I love the original X-Files run, and I love the mythology episodes and everything like that. But it's like, Don't those conspiracy theories in that show feel so quaint? Like, don't you miss when we were talking about black helicopters and the New World Order, and that we're all going to be ruled by alien human hybrids that have inoculated themselves with like a
Yeah.
smallpox vaccine? And it's like, yeah, but now the New World Order is just like replacement migration, and every major city turns into Mogadishu, and it's just so much worse.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there, but I think maybe finish my little rant up here is just that 2026's question of the year will be on identity, and if it's not fundamentally addressed or answered, people are going to continue to break down into more and more fringe ideas that will become eventually mainstreamed that you can't really escape the reality. Because I think one of the biggest universals, if not the only universalism of the world, period, is that we are all inherently tribal beings. And I think that you can't escape that universal truth.
That you answered the question I was going to ask. Because if everything's politics, then nothing is. Or what is politics? If everything is politicized, then what are we talking about? And you're talking about resonance. I want to say agreement, but I want to open up that concept of, do I disagree or agree with somebody? Mm-hmm. And I want to open up that friend-enemy distinction, but it's like, do I have connection? Can I trust this person? Can I joke with this person? I like asking when I meet somebody and they start to poke around in the not progressive, minefield, where we all agree. If somebody's disagreeable on the things, then just like ask about the moon landing, just like kind of see just how far are they willing to question the narratives. And that's the absolutely important thing to understand about the last 5 years, politically speaking. And you could probably go back to 2016 with the Trump win, but it was COVID. So many so-called apolitical liberals were thrust out of that mind field because they found a question and they were excluded or attacked. Like they hit the immune system on the progressive mind field, where they asked, well, what about this vaccine thing? Or wait, why are black people being oppressed? Why is this the most important thing? And you have all this mutation and evolution of people's understanding of the political environment because they confronted something that you're not supposed to ask, or they had a different point of view from what you were supposed to have. And then everybody that gets pushed out of that hive mind has to find some level of distance from it. Just how red-pilled are you? Just how based are you? And when you get away from that, there's so many different directions to fall off, but people they kind of want to find a normal, and they know that thing isn't normal, that we're going to trans your children. We're going to give infinite moral and financial reparations to Black African Americans because of infinite oppression, or you have to wear a mask even though it doesn't make sense. You have to go along with this medical regime and it doesn't make sense. And once you start asking about this one vaccine, then you start reading all the literature about all the other vaccines, and then you're so far off of that plantation that you're thrust out of it. And this is a really long way of going about trying to conceptualize what I'm talking about the not left. Just because you question one thing and you end up over here, like, how do you ally with somebody who's question whether or not democracy is real and good and valid? Wait, does that mean I'm a monarchist? Because that I don't want to take a vaccine because I don't think a central authority should make all my decisions for me. And then how am I now buddies or rubbing shoulders with somebody who wants an ultimate singular authority called monarchy? And so there's all these contradictions out of that mind field. And so you watch people move out of that, and where do you go? And you see the classical liberals, the 90s liberals, the left me's, like with in the wake of Charlie's assassination, so much hay has been made by the Babylon Bee guys the Lindsays, and their whole field to try to control discourse, to try to make enemies among the not left by this woke right thing, by stifling any sort of JQing or any sort of things that aren't pro-Israel. But they don't have the locus of control. So they don't want to control speech, but they want to control how hard. They don't want to control your freedom of association as a podcaster, let's say. But if you're going to interview Nick Fuentes, you have to ask him the hard questions. And so Tucker Carlson didn't do that and made a lot of people angry. And then Piers Morgan said, okay, well, everybody wants this content of Nick Fuentes being put against the wall, not in the shooting sense, but really, really cornered. And then Nick just shows that you can't ask him hard questions. He's going to completely evade what you consider hard questions by ratcheting up discourse into, why can't I talk about this stuff? Why can't I talk about it? Here's my issue. Why do you care? Why don't you care about my people? Why don't you care about American first? So anyways, the politically homeless classical liberals trying to create that Overton window outside of the progressive mind field, it doesn't really fundamentally work because they can't at once be liberal, pro free speech and control speech. So they want the ability to do that consequentiality. If you talk to these people or if you ask these questions, we're going to give you consequences. But outside of that totalitarian unitarian minefield, they don't have the power to control everybody else. And it seems like they're unable to go in the right direction to steer Nick Fuentes, to steer the conversation rather than to control the conversation. They can steer the conversation if they change their mode of engagement. And it doesn't seem like they're able to do that because they still want to be in control of the institutions that they got thrust out of.
Yeah, and I think COVID is a really good example of one of those major events that it's so Pandora's box, because at the end of the day, COVID fundamentally destroyed one of the last American institutions that had religious-like infallibility in the United States, which was the medical system, or like our health officials. Now, don't get me wrong, there has been decades of questioning health officials. There's been a lot of things that the CDC or the National Institutes of Health have gotten wrong over the years, but I mean,
but they were able to control discourse around it.
Oh, yeah, but also the average American trusted what they said.
Yes.
And the average American put their faith in a system that, at least on face, did not appear totally politicized. Now, for me, like, it was kind of funny to, like, watch Trump be like, all right, this is Dr. Deborah Birx, and this is Dr. Anthony Fauci, and this is, like, our COVID response team. And I'm like, wait a second, this is the AIDS guy. Like, we're in a lot of trouble. And it was a sort of weird moment where I'm like, because I'm my own weird political, I go down rabbit holes. I'm like, oh, like, this is not going to end well for us. But at the same time, like, the average person was like, okay, like, there is a response. And then, of course, everything became so, again, nakedly obvious, wherein you had various secretaries of health, or, you know, health secretaries in various states, like, well, I talked to this person. If they said we were going to do this for 2 weeks, then we were going to do it for 2 weeks too. And it was just like, everything fell into anarcho-tyranny. No one knew what the hell they were doing. And it was kind of like ruled by like a left-wing Signal or Slack chat about how these health guys were gonna go do things and what things were like that. And it was all rushed. And then, of course, any sort of vaccine that was being developed, you know, they waited to deploy it until after the election, I think maybe to deprive Trump a potential political win on the issue of COVID. But neither here nor there. It was the complete destruction of the last institution that seemed to have a lot of general public trust. And because of that, and of course, you know, the kids had to go home and do school from home, and parents were then seeing like what kind of crazy shit their kids were being taught for the first time, or that the teachers just didn't give a damn at all about their job and were just trying to collect a paycheck. And so it was just sort of this like weird, you know, the veil being lifted off your eyes, so to speak, moment for a lot of people. And I think that it has, for a lot of ways, broken I mean, it's allowed all sorts of people, like you said, to go in different directions and rabbit holes. And that's when you do have to ask yourself the question of like, well, what do I do when it comes to, well, I don't like this thing, but I also really don't like that, or I don't like this. and you're left being politically homeless, as the
Yeah.
saying goes.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are not as politically homeless as they say that they are, because I think a lot of people will go on their gut instinct, or they'll go on what they've been socialized to believe or conditioned to believe, and kind of stick to it and go from there. I think it's very hard these days for a lot. I think it's very hard for a lot of people to change their minds on a lot of issues in 2025 or 2026 now, because it's a lot of our information media ecosystem is like black tar heroin. Like, once you get hooked, you really don't want to leave, and you want more of it. It's the
Hmm.
same, condition that hardcore pornography does to the human brain, where you want more and more extreme things, and you want more and more extreme radical politics, to a point where you're so fringe, or you're so questioning of everything, that like baseline reality, if there even is one anymore, or whatever's inside the Overton window, is just like, oh, you unenlightened, pathetic things that are still stuck inside Plato's cave. And it gives you the sense of smugness and condescension towards others, but at the same time, there are still very real questions that need to be
Yeah.
addressed. And it's very hard, I think, for anyone to have a conversation with anybody when, like, oh, I don't think this is real, or I think this person is so and so,
Hmm.
ergo, I don't think anything they say fucking matters, and we're just
Yes.
going to throw it out the window.
Yes.
And then it's like, yes, but that person is saying things that are grounded in maybe like observable, verifiable truths that we can repeat, or at least have some replicability. And it becomes really difficult, because almost no, like, the idea of a reality, baseline or otherwise, has kind of been thrown out for everyone retreating to their own respective caves. And I know that I am not without my biases. I'm not saying this as like this enlightened observer. I'm not. I know that I
No.
have my faults and biases. I know that I do. But I think that we've all lost reflexivity, because I think that the age of, conversation or blood sports or whatever you want to call it, I would love for it to return, because I think it is important. I think what you do is important, to talk to left wing or centers, centrists, or not left people, because we do need to have those ideas out there. But at the same time, as what you had said with Nick Land, like, as he had said, like, there's a lot of people that don't want that anymore, and they really just want revenge, or they really just want to loot the place, and you can't have
Hmm.
conversation. And if you acknowledge that someone is looting, then then all of a sudden you're a racist or a bigot or whatever, and then it all kind of goes to hell in a handbasket, because it's like, well, I guess I'm a bigot now. And then it's just like, my ability to have normal conversations about some of the most important civilizational issues of my era get wiped off the face of the earth, because I'm deplatformed, or I'm deemed a not acceptable person to talk to. And it's the same cycle you and I have been witnessing for over 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you talk about beyond politics? You're involved in the Twin Peaks: The Return watch
Oh
through.
yeah, I'm a huge David Lynch head. Like, so yeah, I do we've been doing a retrospective on The Return with my friends John D and Christopher Sandbatch, and it's been
How
fun
many
to.
episodes was that? 24 episodes?
It was 18
really 18.
episodes.
Whoa, and they were long episodes.
Yeah,
and
they were
nothing
they were
happens
film
for
quality.
so much of them.
The more, I mean, so I didn't watch it when it came out on television, so my perspective on the show's original run is totally blurred by the fact I got the box set collection after
Hmm.
it came out, and I watched it all in like two sittings, and I got so damn tired of the Dougie Jones arc, where Kyle MacLachlan is playing this kind of like fumbling
Retard.
retard living
Yeah.
in Las Vegas. Like, don't get me wrong, like Naomi Watts, and the whole thing is really good acting, and it's somewhat entertaining. But I'm like, oh my God, David, like, I want Dale Cooper back so bad. Like, why are you just blue balling me for like 15 episodes? Like, stop doing this to me. But I mean,
Did you
outside
get
of
it?
did I get
Yeah, do you
my?
understand why he spent so much time in that plot arc?
I mean, yes, but to some degree, because he's got a story to tell. And like, I mean, he didn't have to come back to this, and David had a story to tell with it. And also, there's a very much clear reference when he's talking about Sonny Jim, his kid, and it's just like, oh, like, this is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is being clearly referenced here. But at the same time, it's to some degree, I think a lot of it is also trying to call back to the whimsy of perhaps the older show. But it's hard to have whimsy when it's different when it's like Twin Peaks has like the original like small town experiences a murder and we uncover a dark truth and a secret, which a lot of other TV shows since the early 90s have been trying to replicate successfully and unsuccessfully. But it's like it's hard to go back to I'll see you again in 25 years and do a show when the world at least has gotten worse in a lot of ways. Like that innocence has been deprived from everybody.
Yeah,
But
especially in the media environment. There's
oh
very
yeah,
little innocence in our media.
yeah, to a point where some guy on YouTube had made like a several-hour video saying like, I think that David is trying to tell us about violence on television, and his whole the return is about media and violence. And I think that that's not really 100% accurate. I think that David Lynch definitely has a lot to say, or did have a lot to say on violence and media. But I think that the return at the end of the day does kind of try and tell a story about our efforts to combat violence. And I think it's also a really beautiful interrogation of some of these like world-ending fears that we all have. Like one of the best episodes is episode 8, which kind of gives a cosmological understanding to the world of Twin Peaks, where the Trinity test goes off in Los Alamos and the evil of Bob, or like Judy institutes Bob into the world, but also like the counterbalance from the firemen and the watchmen becomes like, well, we'll put out Sarah, we'll put out the Palmer eventually will be the countervailing balance into this, and the possession of certain evil into people. And it's a very interesting way to look at the world, because I think if you are of a certain generation, living under constant fear of the bomb was very, very real for you. I mean, it is still very real for us, but we're not engaged in a Cold War where at any point in time, like there's going to be like 20 new sunrises over, like the Suwalki Gap in Poland or whatever. And so I mean, like that. Those are the things that I get into when I'm not on the internet. Like I've jokingly told people that like if I did not get involved in online politics in the early 2020s, when I didn't have anything to do like so many other people, I probably would have done what every other white guy does on YouTube and just like make video game review essays that are like 2 hours long and hope that I can make a living off of that. I low key wish I could still do that, but then I'm increasingly finding myself with less and less time because I'm either writing more for publications or I'm doing stuff like this. I get married in a month and a half, and then it's just like I don't know when I have the time to do any of those sort of like hobby things. And then like you and I had talked about like 9 months ago during it was during Lent. Like a lot of my life is offline, and so it's hard because the internet always crosses into the meat space, so to speak, and so it's very, you have to navigate all that, and it's just like I don't want to talk about the stuff I talk about on Twitter or anything like that. Like if I wanted to do that, I would ignore you at the coffee shop and I would scroll on my phone. I don't want to talk about the issues because either my opinion and I know yours, and maybe we're going to kind of like talk in circles about the issues or the news events or whatever, but also that like, you have other things going on in your life. Like, hey man, your wife's pregnant, you're having another kid, this is awesome, how are things? And it's like, it all kind of fades into whatever the current thing is, or sometimes people know who I am online, and I really don't like that sometimes because it's like, I'm not that guy right now. I don't want to be that guy right now. But at the same time, you're always that guy because that's how people see you. And it's a pain.
I don't want to my previous rantings in this episode aside. I don't want to discount people's real opinions or real defensiveness around things that would disadvantage their group identity. And I understand the way that people have tried to control me by threatening me in real life, either directly or indirectly. I understand why they want to do that or why people go in that direction. And I understand that freedom of speech is not freedom from consequences. I understand that the consequences are real. I hope people can be a little bit more forgiving or accepting of the project that I've always been involved in. When I was speaking with the detransitioners, I was eroding a completely locked in narrative about transition and what it is to be a trans person. And I eroded that by platforming real people going through real personal change in in some respects on a physical level, going through change and then reverting from that and going through a spiritual change initiated by that physical intervention. And when I spoke with Millennial Woes a year ago, he had me on his show, and I tried to post it to YouTube, and YouTube took it down right away. But he was going to interview me, but it turned out about, as it usually does, I listened to him, and he was really reflexive about how he had changed in the last 10 years. He was very hardline, very what you would call racist, and very needing to be that way in order to push back against this incredibly racist, against his race, regime. And he discussed about how that resentment was eating away at him and was eroding his ability to connect to people and to live a good life, because that resentment became so central to his identity. And I think giving the people who are unacceptable a place to talk allows them to change and broaden their point of view. But when you attack them, the reflex is like, okay, well, I'm now on a defensive posture, so I'm going to go on the offensive and double down and go even further on that thing. And I have to resist that urge when people try to impact me negatively in the real world because of my online life. I need to resist the urge to go to war. I want to understand them. This is a Christian of me. I'm trying to love my enemies here. And I'm trying to get you to love your enemies too.
Yeah, no, in Ecclesiastes, there's, I think it's in chapter 1, it's just, in much wisdom, there's much sorrow, or depending on the translation, much indignation. He that addeth knowledge also adds labor. And when you know so much, or you think that you know so much, because at the end of the day, we really do know so little in comparison to what he knows. I'm not omnipotent. I can fake omnipotence by being online all the time and having RSS feeds about everything, but even then you'll drive yourself insane. Mm-hmm. But I think that when it comes to these questions, whether it's like talking to the detransitioners or talking to people that are skeptical about feminism or whatever, like, it's information you can't easily forget because it fundamentally alters your schema and your heuristics and everything about how the world works. Like, it's the same thing about exceptions to the rule or whatever. It's just like I have a friend of a friend who is a very public anti-pitbull person, and it's just like I just watched Cremu, or however he pronounces his Twitter handle, go on a total bend about pit bull breeders and things like that. And I'm like, I know we're having a different conversation by talking about pit bulls, but like, okay, I understand what you're doing. I do like the posters the breeders put out. Like, they're these like weird frog like animals that are an insult to God. Like, it's like 2 times Bimpy, 2 times Bape, and then there's this like frog pit bull in the middle, and I'm just like, this, I think of that god awful Steve Buscemi quote from like Spy Kids. Like, do you think God doesn't return to Earth because he's afraid of his creation? And it's like, no, but we've definitely made some things that would terrify anybody. But I think that there is much sorrow. I think that Woes has a very good point. I haven't seen the conversation, but I think that if Woes is describing the difficulty to connect in real life because of his positions or what he knows about and what you're exposed to, it's very difficult to live life in a way where you try and live normally, like you're like, for instance, like if you know about the Rosedale study, and if you know about da 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 and XYZ, and like all of a sudden you look at the world around you and you're like, oh my God, like I have to do everything in my power to avoid that when I'm old, or to avoid that for my children, and it's
the Rosedale study. Do I want to know?
It's about white flight in a small Dallas-Fort Worth suburb in the 60s and 70s, and it's mentioned in Jeremy Carl's book. There's also the Twitter user Nightmare Vision has a whole thread on the study itself, and it is, I think it's a real info hazard if you don't know much about the consequences of like white flight in desegregation. But and I mean, that's the thing is that like words like info hazard that used to be relegated to Creative Commons fictional spaces like the SCP universe, there are info hazards that are real. Even Nick Bostrom talks about them. There are pieces of information that once you know them, it is like a man's fall from the garden. We now know I now know the knowledge of good and evil, and because I'm aware of that knowledge, I am fundamentally torn to pieces because it's very hard to walk in real life and not know these things. Like it is very hard.
You
I
sound
mean, like
woke.
I know, but I think there's the woke are more correct than the mainstream on this, right? There is information that is fundamentally hazardous to your psychological health and well-being because at the end of the day, I have to like it's I had a weird moment not too long ago. I was at a friend's house. He's got 3 kids, a fourth on the way, and they had us over for dinner and we were playing with their boys and it was this lovely time. And I'm just thinking to myself like I'm going to hold on to these like cherished little glimpses of joy because I know that if I go back on the phone or if I go back and I talk to people about politics, I'm just going to be so bloody demoralized.
Yeah.
Or because these things are real. They've been ongoing. There's stuff that's been discussed for decades and centuries and millennia, and it's just. I think that it eats at the soul of a man, and I think that it eats at anyone's psychological well-being. And it's like, well, how the hell do you remain happy? And it's like,
Yeah.
do you just live life ignorant, or do you live life as a prepper? And who knows? And I think that that becomes like the great challenge for a lot of people is like, how do I navigate a world or a society that I feel like if you're like on the left, and I think the left and the right have their own versions of like, well, things are slowly getting worse and falling apart. Not that I'm an advocate of horseshoe theory. I'm just saying there are some basic observations the left and right agree on that are a priori. And it's just like, well, what do I do with that? And it's the questions that like I'm thinking about even now. Like I've had the conversations about like private school with my soon-to-be wife and things like that. And it's just like, and she's like, why are you so big on this? And like, she is very much not a political person. And I thank God for it. But nevertheless, even she asks me questions about things that pop up on her like TikTok or on her Facebook feed because I'm not on those platforms. And she's like, "Well, what's going on about this?" And there are times where I want to do the like "Don't worry about it, sweetie" thing, and she replies, "Yay!" Like I love that meme because I think there's some quintessential innocence and paternalism to it. But at the same time, it's like, "Well, I have opinions on this," and I'm like, "Well, then we can talk about it, and that's fine." But like, I think that everyone, regardless, like if you're a hyper political person, you have burdened yourself and you have betrayed your innocence for information that is only going to hurt you. And what do you like? I don't want to say like you're a masochist or whatever, but it's just like, so what do you now are going to do with this information that hurts you and the real life consequences of engaging with this information? Because, you. Like it's very funny because it's like like a year ago you were hosting James Lindsay and Local Distance and Dave Green and now James Lindsay hates your ass. It's like I always considered you to be the guy that like liberals and conservatives or anyone could really kind of come on and talk to about these issues from various perspectives, and I want that to still continue for you because I think that you are, and I don't mean to say this rudely or to make it sound like an insult, but like you are this like last vestige of like liberal free discourse that I would love to still like this island of discursive safeness or whatever to still exist, because there are people that I disagree with vehemently that I have really great conversations with. Like there are 2 communists that kind of one lives in New York and I think one lives in Chicago, and they have a podcast together. And like I love talking to them. We're going to disagree on a whole bunch of issues from just like an epistemic perspective, but I can still talk to you about these things, and it makes it entertaining to see how we all kind of come at these issues, sometimes very similarly, sometimes miles apart. But like they're what I would call like little O orthodox Marxists. And it's like, okay, like I can see where you're coming from. This is entertaining. It's a good discussion. But like you do that on the timeline, it just doesn't exist because the timeline is PvP mode all the time. I've got to like kill or be killed. If I pop out of cover, I'm going to get shot. Da 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 da. Every group chat's a gang. Every piece of drama is like a drive-by shooting. And it's to pardon my degradation of speech here, but it's like it's very low-key tiring.
Yeah. You made me think of all these things, and then when you're done talking, they all like flee from my head.
My apologies.
No. But when I was thinking about what we were going to talk about, the first thing that came to my head was like, so did you get a girlfriend?
Some people have. I've been.
So you found a wife, though.
Yes, I did.
Very happy for you, because that was the piece for you that I was hoping for. Oh, like, well, that's the next thing for him. When's that going to happen?
I proposed last May, so it's been the engagement is soon to come to an end. So no, I'm looking forward to this new stage in life, and um, I'm looking forward to the wedding being over because I'm tired of all the
Oh,
planning crap.
yeah. Wow. Yeah, I bet.
I feel like weddings are a racket in the sense that like we were looking for a wedding photographer, and it all worked out because my choir director's nephew was willing to do it at a much cheaper rate. But like we talked, we emailed out all these people, and they're like, "Well, these are our packages, and these are like your investments and your deposits," and I'm like, "You just take the photograph. Why am I paying you $8,000?" And so it's kind of wild, and it's just like, oh my goodness. And it is kind of funny because like she knows who I am, obviously she knows what I do, and she's just like, yeah, you have some interesting friends, some of them are really weird, and I'm like, well, some of them are coming to the wedding, sweetheart, so I just be nice, but at the same time it's all like it'll just be kind of entertaining in that regard because it's just like I had done some side work through my connections. Being on the internet is who I am, and it fundamentally just it basically paid for Christmas, and it paid for a good chunk of the last minute wedding stuff. And I was like, huh. People would say like I run a racist podcast. And I'm like, well, my racist podcast just paid for everyone's Christmas presents. That's kind of like a weird thing to say out
Racist
loud.
podcast.
Not that I wouldn't use that label for myself.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
I wouldn't either. I consider myself a guy who likes to ask questions and interrogate the issues of the day, and that's about it. I mean, although even the phrase "I'm just asking questions" is such a loaded phrase and statement these days. But no, I quite like where I'm going personally, but also at the same time,
Where's that?
well, I mean, just moving on to the next stage of my life. I mean, I'm about to
Yes.
get married. I don't know what I'm doing with this. I've been doing it for 5 years now and some change, and I don't know where I'm going to go with it. In part because every election cycle, especially every 4 years, there's a new crop of influencers. There's a new crop of people that get like hired by their respective sides, like institutions and media. And it's just like, well, that hasn't happened for me. Not saying that I would sell out for 30 pieces of silver or anything, but like,
What about
like, I'm not-
$7,000?
yeah, and I mean, it would be like, wouldn't it be nice if the Japanese were to start offering, like 70,000 yen a month? That'd be, I mean, like, I'm sure that's probably nothing. I don't know what the exchange rate is. I know that yen is not much compared to the dollar, but like, it would be, I mean, like, I would be like a Japanese diplomat. Sure, why not? Like, I would that would make sense because all my audience keeps paying me to review anime from 20 years ago. So it's like, yeah, fine, whatever. But I think that for where things are going online, discursively, it's particularly funny. Like, I think Yarvin has this interesting bit. I think it's in Unqualified Reservation. No, I think no, it's his now more recent work where he says, when people present you two choices, you just think that those are your only options. And he says, isn't that a neat trick? And I've noticed that a lot on the timeline because this is the first administration that feels somewhat competently right wing in my lifetime, in that things are moving in a direction. Like, it's cool to see DHS and even the White House's Twitter account talk about remigration and to give, DHS and ICE and Border Patrol a budget larger than most countries have budgets for militaries. That's very good for me, and it's very good for America. But at the same time, you get lost in Twitter and you get lost in these discursive spaces because there are people that are online that do work in the administration that were once Twitter anons, and that I'm like, some of them I'm mutuals with, and it's like weird because it's like, on one hand, this is the closest like this weird niche part of Twitter gets access to direct democracy, but at the same time, we let the slightest thing that comes up on our timelines then just blow up, and we make a mountain out of a molehill, or people doom, and this is where you get that. I don't like dichotomies because I think that that's very, very restrictive. The only dichotomy that exists is the way of life and the way of death, and that echoes back to Christ, and it gets echoed back into the apostles and the Didache. But like the whole like, oh, someone's a panican, or someone's a plan truster, and I'm like, this is a terrible dichotomy, but I know why you're doing it, because yes, I'm going to want this administration to succeed. I want them to be supported. I want them to do all of the things that they campaigned on, because I think that it is fundamentally good for the country. Doesn't mean I'm not going to criticize you when you're doing things that I think are wrong or you're selling out or
Yeah.
whatever. But don't lump me in with the guy that said he's not going to vote this year. Or don't lump me in with the guy that says, well, actually, what we really need is the complete destruction of the country so my niche political ideology can rise from the ashes. Like, don't lump me in with that guy either. But that's the thing is that it's very difficult to be, quote unquote, your own person when you're engaging in networks and
Yeah.
social groups and tribes and clans and gangs of group chats and clan or like there's all sorts of ways in which people have tried to navigate the online right and the various camps they're in, and it's like I'm really trying to be my own guy, and I try not to be confrontational on Twitter because like I'm friends with people that fundamentally hate each other, and I want to hear every different perspective I can because even a guy who I may disagree with vehemently, he may be right about something, and maybe I should listen. Whereas maybe the meme that these guys are like cooking up in the group chat, maybe that's going to be good for my interests, and maybe I want to listen in on that. And I think that becomes the weird part of social media in the year of our Lord 2026 because it gets increasingly difficult to navigate without being assigned a label for yourself, even though you weren't given that label. But
Yeah.
you have to live with it and endure.
Yeah. And always just chimp out and trust the plan.
Yeah, right. It seems to be the cycle.
That's the dichotomy. But you just like you synthesize both.
Yeah. As Gio says, you never really do escape the wheel of Twitter samsara until you log off for good, which I think is true.
Yeah. So, speaking of Geo, what's coming up next for you this year? What are you guys doing? Where can people find you? What are they going to find when they get there?
Oh, sure. Well, I don't usually show my face as often these days. I've just been mainly because I'm lazy and I work and then I come and then I do this and I'm like, I usually try and dress somewhat presentably. And then there are days where I'm like, I am in a t-shirt and sweatpants. I am not putting the camera on. You guys can look at the frog as per usual. No, so I mean, for me lately, it has been, I really would like to make 2026 the year where I write more than I do maybe anything else because I've noticed, and I'm sure you have too, that once you get locked into a certain way of doing things, your muscles atrophy in other areas. And I mean, conversation and being verbal and live streaming and having these conversations is a lot of fun because I think people like that. It's the parasocial friendship simulator. Everyone likes that. But at the same time, your intellectual muscles sometimes can
Yes.
weaken if you're not focusing on those things. So one of the things that we started, or well, we continued and it grew really strong this year is my friend Dimes and I. Dimes runs a podcast called Blood Satellite. Those guys are Canadian. He and I have a show called Do You Even Read? And we jokingly say it's the only anti-literacy podcast on the internet. But we say that tongue-in-cheek because all that we do is we review various books that are sometimes very memey, but also they are fundamental to the discourse on the left and the right. So, I mean, we've reviewed everything from White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, all the way to The Unprotected Class by Jeremy Carl. We've reviewed, I mentioned Spinal Catastrophism earlier. We've reviewed Walter Rodney's How Did Europe Underdevelop Africa? We've covered Ivan Illin's On Resistance to Evil by Force. We're going to be covering George Sorel's Reflections on Violence later this year. And we like covering these things because, one, it keeps my intellectual rigor strengthened because I'm constantly forcing myself to read things I may disagree with. But also, I think it's important for us to give good breakdowns and actually read the literature that people tell you to do, because people are like, read theory or read this, and it's like, well, have you read it? No. So we try to read so you don't have to. You and I continue to do the show called The Digital Archipelago, where we cover the news, media, culture, the arts. We jokingly say we're on Twitter, so you don't have to be with that show. That's our little tagline for that. And that'll continue on until either it stops being popular or we annoy the crap out of each other and we call it quits. I don't know. And on top of that, I'm just going to be writing and putting out more essays and reviews. I am thankfully going to be in Blaze Magazine's Frontier, Blaze Media's Frontier magazine again. I always cover issues and topics I never expect them to. Like, I'll give out like 20 ideas, and then their editor is like, I like this one. And I'm like, damn it, now I have to write about late night TV. And so I'll have an article out there. I don't know, they might change the title, but the working title I sent them was The Strange Death of Late Night. So that should hopefully be out sometime this year. Anywhere that you find the quote unquote the frog that I usually go by online, it'll be there. Or I'll be writing as Matthew Williams, and you'll find me there in Frontier. You'll find me there in other places. I hope to get published in other publications later this year. I really do think that if you want eyes and ears on you professionally, you have to be given nice bylines with a name that sounds presentable. I mean, Dave Green has, I think, done that to a great degree of success to talk to all sorts of random strangers and things like that. So I hope to emulate that strategy for 2026. But what I do hope to continue on is to have conversations like these, because if you don't have conversations where you're self-reflexive, or at least putting everything out on the table where you're like, I don't have the answers to everything, but by God, I want to find them out. I think those are the most important ones that we can have, because as we said at the beginning, the conversation of 2026 has to be on identity. And unless that conversation gets solved, then things will continue to escalate and get worse.
Yeah. I mean, you can freely associate me with the worst people and shut me down or stymie my ability to communicate to you, but that ends up atrophying your ability to understand what's going on beyond that. I try to be open-minded. I try to, I mean, it's Twitter, so I don't even know if I've been rude on Twitter lately. I don't even know what I'm doing. But there's got to be, there's something that needs to be explored. There's always something that needs to be explored. Do you have a sense, like, who are the people that are like really got their finger on the pulse? Or I guess you mentioned McLuhan. What are the frameworks that we should be really bringing back into our awareness of what's going on in order to uncover it further? Like, what are the guideposts right now?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things to maybe consider would be reading things like I've been recently reading Nicholas Luhmann's The Reality of Mass Media, which I think has been really helpful. I mean, it's translated from German into English, but I mean, it's really worth your time to look at, because it gives us a way to look at entertainment and the schema formation and how we create, how we construct our own ideas of reality. And if we're somewhat aware of how that works, then it becomes better to understand, like, am I being played or tooled around with here? I mean, Luhmann and McLuhan, I think, are very important. But also, I think when we look at Twitter, especially, I think Twitter is a tool of imperial messaging, because it's constantly reposting and reifying and reiterating messages and memes and ideas that become a very, if I recall correctly, it's a very spatially oriented network of empire, and that's a very space form of communication, and that's something that another Canadian scholar had written about, which is the Empire of Communications by oh God, what's his name, Harold Innis. And so I really hope that maybe becoming more aware of how communication and basic group assumption, or basic assumption groups like with Wilfred Bion and others, the more I look into those things, the more it kind of gives me an understanding of, like, well, how are these groups being formed? Or if I were to create a network of like-minded people, how would I do that to fundamentally change the ecosystem for memes and ideas? And I mean, we recently covered, I think I have a book somewhere here. Yep. I wish it felt incomplete, but I read Anti-Memetics, Why Some Ideas Resist Spreading by Nadia Asparova. I'm sure I mispronounced her name, but forgive me. She works at Substack, I think, still. But it was an interesting set of ideas about how certain ideas get picked up, or how we say certain things are good for us, but most people still don't wash their hands or whatever. And it was an entertaining read. Dimes and I covered it, but like, you have to interrogate these things, because if you don't, then it's it's the fog of war, and if we don't have a map, then we're more likely to not consider, oh, there is a ridge line over there, there's probably like an enemy gun emplacement or a sniper or something, and I'm gonna get like one-shotted by a Mesoamerican corn demon if I listen to that tech bro who's taking ayahuasca or something. Like, it's important to be aware, and I think that's what I want to do, is I want to be more maybe meta in my commentary, because I think that it doesn't matter if you're like a raging progressive on HRT or whatever, if you're a right winger who's like, Ray Pete, generative energy maxing. You need to be aware that we're in an ecosystem and a media space that doesn't care who you are. It will happily manipulate you and eat you alive.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be eaten alive, and I want to live, and I want to be saved. For I am drowning like Peter, and if I don't reach out for the hand, then I'm drowning, and I'd rather not drown. So I will stick to I will continue my best to walk along the narrow and royal path, as difficult as it is. But at the end of the day, I think that it certainly helps you, myself, and really anyone who listens, left, right, or center, to kind of maybe figure out how dangerous it is to maybe not be equipped to engage in these spaces. Because yeah, the things that like Steve Laws or what other people say, in a large part, are based in fundamental truths. Because as I mentioned earlier, tribalism is the one universalism that all societies and cultures do abide by. And if you're not allowed to have that, or if it's being denied to you, and it's being denied to you technologically, politically, culturally, demographically,
Yeah.
then we're in a heaping world of trouble. And I certainly am closer to those issues on identity than I am perhaps that identity is all relative and it doesn't matter and just accept your extinction.
Yeah.
So all sorts of things will continue to happen. I think that's what's allowed me to stay around for so long, is that I kind of don't know what I'm doing. I just like go towards the things that interest me,
Okay.
and it's gotten me a very broad and general
Yeah.
audience. So I
Yeah.
guess I'll keep doing that.
I guess that's what I've been doing. So yeah,
It
it
fits.
feels good to hear that you're reifying your commitment to that mode of engagement. I do too. If I were to be asked what I think would be essential to understand the political landscape and to what's going on, I would say people pick up a coin game like Root if you have access to a target in your area. A coin game is a counterinsurgency board game, and there's 3 or 4 factions, and they're all asymmetrical, and they all have to rely on each other to betray each other to win. And once you start to get into the mind space of this asymmetrical battlefield where everybody's got possessed by their own self-interest but is forced to work together, you'll understand politics so much more as this moving set of forces rather than these ideologies or the spectrum of people in this camp or that camp. It's like everybody's got their own self-interest, and they all have certain tools and limitations, and they're all just relying on each other to get to the next step. And to understand that the tactics change and the strategy changes, people's beliefs change all the time, and understanding that there's a developmental arc to everybody that you're interacting with, and that you can be, if you attack them straightforward, you're going to lock them into that mode of engagement. But if you strategize, work with them, you have a lot more breadth of control over the environment by working along somebody like Nick Fuentes, or working along with people with these distasteful ideas to really open them up, because then they will respond as human beings rather than as enemies, or as somebody whose defensive animalistic tendencies have to override every other level of nuance and engagement. So I think that those are really good. And you brought up the antimemetics book.
Yeah.
I'm still, one of my favorite books is There Is No Antimemetics Division.
Oh, that's cited heavily in the beginning. Of
Oh,
this
really?
thing.
Okay, good. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's such a good book. It just like threw me for a loop. That and Culture of Critique really just like shocked me out of my skin.
That'll do it. That'll do it.
Yeah. Well, Prudentialist, love your work. Thank you so much for coming on. This is a great conversation to have at the beginning of the year, the end of the year. I hope it provides both of us a pivot, a refreshment, and then our audience to some crossover to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Benjamin. I greatly appreciate it, and I hope you have a happy new year as we're recording on January 1st.
Happy wedding, man.
Oh yeah, that too. That's in a month and a half. I appreciate it. But yeah, I hope that we'll talk soon.
Yeah, absolutely. God bless.
Take care.
Oh, there we go.